They thought he was nobody, just another black teen standing in the wrong courtroom at the wrong time. The whispers, the smirks, the dismissive glances, all of it wrapped around him the moment he stepped inside. Before we go deeper into what really happened in that room, pause for a moment and think. How often do stories like this go unheard? If anything in these first seconds already hits you emotionally, feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments or share this moment with someone who needs to hear it. Now, back to the truth they never expected to face. But what they didn't know was that he carried something powerful, something that would flip the entire room on its head. And when the truth finally surfaced, every face in that courtroom froze, because the boy they mocked was far more than they ever imagined. So the real question is, what happens when judgment meets reality? He grew up learning how to stay unnoticed, not because he lacked talent, but because being young, black, and brilliant often meant moving through a world that doubted him before he even spoke. At 18, he was already years ahead of his peers, quiet, observant, and disciplined in ways most adults could never match. His dream had always been simple, to prove that his mind could take him further than any stereotype ever allowed. By day, he studied relentlessly, working part-time and balancing responsibilities most teens never had to think about. By night, he prepared for something bigger, something he never bragged about, something almost no one knew. To the people in his neighborhood, he was just the kid who carried too many books. To those who underestimated him, he was just another face they wouldn't remember. But behind that calm exterior was a discipline shaped by years of pushing against assumptions, a determination that had caught the attention of people far beyond his world. On the morning, everything changed. He wasn't looking for trouble. He wasn't even supposed to be in that courthouse, just dropping off documents, following instructions for a job he took immense pride in. The building felt cold, crowded, and impatient, yet he moved with quiet confidence, unaware that every step was pulling him closer to a moment that would expose the harsh truth of how quickly judgment forms. He didn't know that before the day ended, strangers would question his presence, challenge his worth, and mistake him for someone who didn't belong. And he certainly didn't know that the very thing he worked for in silence would become the truth that stopped the entire courtroom in its tracks. He stepped into the courthouse hallway expecting a routine errand, nothing more. The air was thick with impatience, papers shuffling, heels clicking, officials brushing past people without ever really seeing them. He kept his head down, moving toward the clerk's office with the same steady discipline he carried everywhere. But as he passed a group of officers, he felt their eyes track him, not with curiosity, but with suspicion. It was the kind of look he had known his whole life, the kind that tried to shrink him before he even opened his mouth. He kept walking, reminding himself to stay focused, but the weight of their gaze followed him like a shadow. Then came the moment that changed everything. A loud voice cut through the hallway, sharp and commanding, and suddenly the officers moved toward him. He stopped instinctively, unsure if they meant him, hoping they didn't. But they did. Their stare hardened into something colder, something that made the air feel suddenly thinner. Without asking who he was or why he was there, they surrounded him. People nearby turned their heads, some curious, others whispering. It was as if the entire hallway agreed on one thing. A young black teen in this space must be doing something wrong. He tried to steady his breath, but the questions came fast, accusatory gestures, demanding tones, eyes judging his every move. Not one of them considered that he might belong, that he might have a purpose here beyond the stereotype they projected onto him. As he stood there, the officers looked over the documents he carried, but instead of reading them, they analyzed him, his clothes, his posture, and his age. Nothing he did seemed respectable enough. Nothing he carried seemed legitimate enough. They told him he couldn't be where he was, that teens didn't handle official paperwork, and that he must be lying about his reason for being inside. A crowd formed, each new pair of eyes adding pressure, adding assumptions, and adding unspoken accusations. He felt anger flicker beneath his composure, but he buried it. He had learned long ago that anger could be mistaken for a threat. Still, something inside him tightened as the officers pushed him toward the courtroom, insisting he remain there until they figured out the truth. The courtroom door closed behind him with a thud that felt final, as if the world outside had decided to judge him before hearing anything that resembled facts. Inside, a judge glanced up, uninterested at first, but the moment she saw him, her expression shifted into irritation, impatience, and something colder, prejudice wrapped in authority. She asked why he was there, but the officers answered for him, explaining their suspicions as if they were undeniable truths. The judge nodded, barely looking at the documents in his hands, choosing instead to study him with that same familiar skepticism he had faced since childhood. And if you're still here listening to this moment unfold, take a breath and stay with it. Because what happens next is the part people rarely talk about, the part most turn away from. Don't blink, don't skip. This is where everything begins to shift. The room fell silent, not because of anything he had done, but because of everything they assumed he was. And as he stood there in that silence, alone, judged, dismissed before being heard, he felt the moment sharpening around him, a moment that could break him or expose something none of them were prepared to face. What they didn't realize was that the truth they were so determined to deny was the very thing about to turn this entire courtroom upside down. The judge's voice cut through the room with the kind of authority that left no room for truth. She dismissed his explanations before he could even form them, waving her hand as if his presence was an inconvenience rather than a right. The officers stood behind him, arms crossed, waiting for her verdict as though it were already decided. The room felt smaller, tighter, and darker. He could feel the stares drilling into him, each one a reminder that, to them, he was guilty of simply existing in a space they believed wasn't built for him. When the judge demanded proof of why he was there, he held out the documents again. They were snatched from his hands and skimmed carelessly, as if the ink itself wasn't worth reading. She sighed loudly, the kind of sigh meant to humiliate, to remind everyone that she believed she was dealing with a lie. With a cold glance, she questioned how someone like him could be entrusted with anything official. The words weren't said outright, but the meaning was unmistakable. The room absorbed her tone, feeding off it, confirming their assumptions with nods and murmurs. Then came the moment that pushed him to the edge. The judge ordered the officers to hold him for further questioning, a decision that felt like a sentence. He felt his body tense, his future tightening into something suffocating. The courtroom, which should have been a place of truth, now felt like a trap closing around him. For a split second, he wondered if this was how stories like his always went, buried under prejudice before justice ever had a chance to breathe. As the officers moved toward him, hands reaching for his arms, something inside him snapped. Not in anger, but in clarity. He reached slowly into his jacket, every eye widening, every assumption sharpening, the tension so thick it threatened to explode. The officers froze, ready to react. The judge leaned forward, suspicion turning into alarm, and then he pulled out the one thing none of them expected, the thing that would shatter every assumption in the room. In that instant, the entire courtroom held its breath, because the truth he was about to reveal wouldn't just defend him, it would expose them all. When he held up the badge, the room shifted. The tension didn't disappear, it shattered. The judge's face drained of certainty, the officers stepped back, and the murmurs in the courtroom turned into stunned silence. That small, polished emblem carried the truth they had refused to see. He wasn't an intruder, a troublemaker, or a suspect. He was a Supreme Court clerk, one of the youngest ever selected, chosen for his brilliance, discipline, and unwavering dedication. In that moment, the power dynamic flipped. The same people who doubted his right to stand in that courtroom now scrambled to correct their posture, searching for excuses, explanations, anything that might soften what they had done. But the damage was already carved into the air. They hadn't just misjudged him, they had revealed the painful reality he had carried his whole life. At times, his education, discipline, and exceptional qualities held no weight. To them, his skin spoke first. He walked out of the courtroom that day with his head high but not untouched. The humiliation lingered. The memory of those suspicious eyes stayed with him. And the truth was heavier than any badge he'd ever carry. No level of success could completely shield him from bias. But he also understood something deeper. His story wasn't just his own. It echoed a pattern, a cycle that stretched across neighborhoods, schools, workplaces, and courtrooms. A cycle that continued because too many people refused to confront it. And if a story like this made you feel something, anger, sadness, or hope, don't let it end here. Countless stories similar to his exist, with voices clamoring for recognition. If you want to walk with me through more of them, stay connected, hit subscribe, join this journey, and let your voice be part of the change. Because the question isn't whether he belonged there. The real question is, how many more stories like his will it take before the world finally faces the truth it keeps trying to look away from?